My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I am the CEO of After the Fire. Welcome to the podcast, How to Disaster: Recover, Rebuild, and Reimagine. In this podcast, we bring you the very best practices, best hearts, and great ideas from other disaster-affected communities. Thank you for joining us. Welcome once again to another episode of the How to Disaster podcast, where we help you recover, rebuild, and reimagine. Today's guest is actually somebody that I had on a couple of years ago, and it's Pamela Van Halsema. And a couple of years ago, she came onto the podcast to talk about her role in Coffee Park in the 2017 Tubbs fire. In 2017, Pamela and her family, she has 3 children, they actually lost their home that night on October 8th. And it was a real turning point for her in so many ways. She's a librarian by trade. She's worked in education. She's got all of these really incredible skills around communication, digital assets, and really just wonderful people skills. And so about maybe a year after I interviewed her, she contacted me about something else. And I was like, why don't you come work for me? Why don't you come work for After the Fire? I think that we could use your talents. We're doing our website. We're doing this big changeover. And then, I had been doing so many of our community visits by myself. And I was recognizing that from an institutional point of view, that we really needed to bring other people into the fold, especially those who've been there, like Pam, who have not only lost their home, but have actually taken on a huge leadership role in their community. Pam is actually past president of Coffee Strong, which was an organization that helped about 1,500 homeowners rebuild their home and provided communication, care, weekly meetings, information sharing. She was excellent at communication, especially, and a lot of people may look towards other folks in that organization and give them most of the credit for what happened. But I believe, this is my opinion, that really so much of their success in staying in the news for literally years was due to Pam's excellent people skills and communication. So over the past, maybe about year, I've been working really closely with Pam as she builds out the community to community program. And I think that it is I'm not exaggerating at all when I say that she has taken what was a good program that did good work and made it into a great program that does great work. We've traveled together a lot. We go into these disaster affected communities, and Pam has not only excellent organizational skills, but also so much compassion and empathy. And when you match those two things together, especially when you work in disaster, you really do have a formula for building community trust and efficacy. Having Pam in that position has really allowed us to make that program something that I am just super immensely proud of. And as we are about to do our first big summit, we've done some smaller things. She's also the driving force behind organizing that. So I asked Pam to come on and do this podcast with me, really to talk about, once again, to share her own personal story, but also to talk about the work she's been doing here at After the Fire for the past year. So I hope that you enjoy this next, 45 minutes to an hour. I hope that you come out of it with the same sort of appreciation for the skill set that she brings to this work. And then you also learn from, the things that she talks about how to take something that's, a painful thing in your life and actually not only turn it into something that benefits so many other people, but really sort of as a capstone in one's own healing and recovery and rebuilding and reimagining what life is like, after a mega fire. So once again, thank you for spending this time with us. And I'm Jennifer Gray Thompson. I am the host of this podcast, as well as being the CEO of After the Fire USA. If you want to know more about our organization, please visit www.afterthefireusa.org, and welcome to the podcast. Once again, Pamela Van Halsema, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So I was hoping that even though we have already recorded an entire podcast about Coffee Strong and your fire story, but for those people who haven't heard, would you mind taking a couple of minutes and telling the audience about your fire story and how you came to do this work?
Sure, absolutely. You know, back in the fall of 2017, I was living here in my home of 20 years, Coffee Park, which is a tract middle-class neighborhood in Santa Rosa, California, with my 3 children and my husband, our dog and our cat, and just living our life. You know, my children were all in public schools, my husband a professor at the local junior college, and I was teaching at a junior high in Petaluma as the teacher librarian. And I was also doing some advocacy work also in the area for children's issues. And so I was definitely embedded in working with the community. And then what nobody ever believed would happen occurred, where in one night, our neighborhood and many other places throughout the county burned up in flames. Of course, that night we went to bed knowing that there was a fire in the next county. I knew that. I read it on the news, but never did I dream that in a matter of, that was 11 p.m. By 2 a.m. I'd be evacuating and my house gone in the next 30 minutes. That was a fast-moving, terrifying fire. We all got out okay, all but the cat, rest in peace. And that was a watershed moment in our family. Everything changed, not just for me, but for everyone else who lived in Coffee Park. We had 1,400 houses burned that night in my neighborhood alone. And so just what happened was we all just had a million questions, and I started typing up questions and questions and questions. What do we do? Where do we go? What resources are there for us to figure out our next move? And it was a learning experience each step of the way. And the good thing was I had a little bit of background in community organizing already. And I had I had some neighbors who were also thinking about, let's work together. And so we worked together and got involved right away in helping one another and building a community organization that we ended up filing as a nonprofit and calling ourselves Coffee Strong. And it was really a place where we could think through the challenges that lied ahead, define what those challenges were, and figuring out what options people had and shared what those options were. And we partnered with all the different stakeholders in the area to try to figure out what resources were needed. So as my background as a librarian, you know, what we do is we vet resources, find resources, and make them accessible to people at the time that they need them. And also as a background as an educator, just being able to understand and explain things that were complex and make them more easy to understand. I felt like those were the things that I was able to contribute to that work. And there were others in my neighborhood who had backgrounds in construction, who had backgrounds in insurance, who had background in finance. All of those different things were needed. And so we came together as a group that everyone had a skill to share, and those are the ones that I did. So I helped a lot with communication and interpretation of information and making sure that people could find it when they needed it. I'm happy to say I'm sitting in my rebuilt home. We were able to move home at the 2-year anniversary of our fire. I know that's not the story that every fire region has. Sometimes it takes much longer. I'm grateful that we were able to get back on our property in a newly rebuilt home within those 2 years.
So thank you so much for sharing that part, because, you know, if you fast forward about a year ago when you and I were having a conversation, maybe I can't even remember how long it's been now, maybe a year and a half ago, maybe. And I asked you if you wouldn't mind helping us on a project when we were reimagining ourselves as after the fire, but also to bring you on to work on the community to community program. So I'm hoping that you can actually talk to the listeners about the community to community program. What does it do, and how has it grown since you've come on board?
Thank you. Yeah, well, I knew about the work that Jennifer was doing with Rebuild North Bay all throughout our own recovery here. In fact, Rebuild North Bay helped Coffee Park directly with some public projects, big infrastructure projects. So thank you for that work. And I also knew that other fires began to happen. In fact, as that common wall, it's a wall, you can read about it read about it on the website to learn more about that project. But as that was literally being dedicated, there was the Paradise Fire. The campfire was, we could see the smoke in the distance, and we all felt it in our bones that, oh my goodness, this is not happening to another community. And even we at Coffee Strong and Jennifer with her work, a lot of us went up there and really wanted to find out, can we be help? What can we do to help? Because we know what this is like. We've been through this, and we don't want it to be as hard as it was for us, for you. So that's really the heart of the work, is to take the people who have been through the experience before and have them, with empathy and knowledge and experience, help another community. And so making those connections between communities, making connections from one person who is really knowledgeable and experienced with another who could really use the help. Sometimes they don't even realize they need the help yet, but to know that it's available. And just in the community really doesn't think anyone should have to reinvent recovery, but there are people who have gone through it. And we also realize that not every fire is the same. Certainly the geography, the people, the economic status, all different variables make a difference in what happens next. And so each new fire is inventing and discovering and being creative and problem solving. And we want to learn from them too. So it's that constant learning, constant sharing, and collaboration is really at the heart of the work. And so now the work of After the Fire has expanded beyond the North Bay region to be available. And this was long before I got invited to work with After the Fire. But in working up in Oregon in 2020, there were devastating lightning fires that happened along Labor Day just 2 years ago, helping folks think through that. And now there's been subsequent fires. Today, there's terrible fires this very day burning in Oregon, down in Southern California, in the Central Valley, or in Tahoe area, and New Mexico and Colorado. And really it's the Western United States, and in fact beyond that as well, that's having these new climate disasters with fire. And we really need to understand the systems that are at play here, share the information, and build a network of leaders. It's really at the community level that we're looking at these things. There are other agencies and wonderful programs that help individuals with individual assistance. But I think what we're really trying to do is look at the community level and what can be done at that level to speed things along, get back more resiliently, help people have a safe and secure future.
And I think that you just highlighted it. One of the things that's been sort of one of our secrets to success is that I think because we had all been through or been very severely impacted by a disaster, we knew firsthand that the talent to rebuild a community exists within the community. We don't need anybody to come in and supersede our role in the community, but having coaches that say, oh, you're a leader, let me support locally led and designed recoveries and reimagining what your community will look like, because it will never look like it did the day before. But like, how do you, I love that approach is central so much to what we do in this work is no heroes, no saviors, no capes, no kudos. It's more like we go in and we start to evaluate like who are the effective leaders across sectors and how can we support their particular recovery. So can you talk about that? Like, what does a deployment look like when we do it?
Mm-hmm. Well, when there is by deployment, we bring a team to a community that is in the midst of a recovery process. That could be immediately after a fire, or it could be a year later. It could be 2 years later. It doesn't matter really. Often when if you're in the midst of an emergency, there are a lot of things that occur, especially if it's a federally declared emergency, and there's going to be Red Cross, and there's going to be your own county emergency management folks, and there's going to be a lot going on. There's going to be first responders. There are going to be second responders as well. But and the press, but as that clears a bit, you're no longer in a shelter, but or living on a friend's couch. You may be in a motel. You maybe have a somewhat temporary shelter if you've been directly impacted. For me, I was living in a friend's house for a while, and then we moved to another rental. As that smoke clears, and that's when you have to, as a leader, maybe you're the mayor, maybe you're the county administrator, maybe you're in the planning department. Or maybe you're in a community-based organization. That's when you're like, okay, what are the first steps that we need to take strategically, and how do we not duplicate efforts? And what programs are we eligible for? Maybe there's public assistance that we might not have dreamed. So that's when we may go and have many conversations before coming to visit, finding out, well, let's just listen. Let me hear what the conversations are. What's the situation on the ground? We'd like to bring some people with us that we think would be really knowledgeable about what you need now. And so sometimes we invite folks along who are experts in that area, and we just go. If not, we'll just go and we'll just listen, because that's really the first step. Like I said earlier, each fire is unique, and the situation and the people involved. Then that's a learning mission, really, a learning and relational, building a relationship of trust and hope that there is a future, there is a way you can move forward. Also understanding, I know there's often a rush to try to get things done quickly, but it's long, and just the realization to take a deep breath. This is going to take a while, and that's not always the thing you want to hear, but these things they do take a while, but things will come together, and that's what we try to be, that encouraging word, and kind of knowing what to expect next. Then we just stay on the line with those folks. We write up notes in a formal way so that they have that moment in time recorded for their own reflection, for their own, because there's so much going on literally after a disaster that it's hard to remember it all. So we try to memorialize that in a formal document. And then we continue to connect and problem solve and be basically advisors and consultants to that community after that first visit, until we visit again. And this is all we don't charge anything. So we do this, but we don't force ourselves on folks either. We just want to be a resource. We are funded through philanthropy and through corporate philanthropy, and that's very needed to do this work. The work doesn't happen for nothing. Travel and bringing all those people together. And so it is important to find the right funders for this work. But I know if you talk to the communities that we have worked with, the work really was very pivotal in them being able to move forward. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to help in that way.
I'm so glad that you pinned that last part. It is, it's a little bit unusual what we do, because we're not part of the national VOAD. So we're not running in to help them with replace their driver's license or papers, or, the Red Cross has a very specific mission. Even United policyholders, they only help people who are insured. And we have a lot of people who are not insured. So they're great, but there's that whole picture. And so it's a little bit funny for philanthropy sometimes to understand that we also have a commitment to serving the entire community. And that means everybody who's affected, they are, and whatever leader or whatever stakeholder group they fall into, we're interested in supporting that stakeholder group, and it depends on the community. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. There's also the factor of we have to really, one of the things that we do as soon as there is a fire that we think we're going to go into is that we pull all of the demographics, the voting history, We want to know, like, what level of civic engagement is there, everything. And so we work in fires that are everything from, suburban, which was much like the Tubbs fire that took Pam's home, to frontier, which is like way rural, so very small communities, which may have under 1,000 people in them and may take very long time to get to. And then, a similar fire like in Colorado, the Marshall fire was also a suburban fire. So I'm hoping that you can talk about, like, what are some of the differences, or what are some of the things that have surprised you about the different responses to the same climate-based event?
Just if you imagine even the fire that we experienced here in Coffee Park, the first thing you want to do is talk to your neighbors, and nobody's there because their house burned down. So one of the very first things you have to do is try to figure out where everyone is and where they went and how can I communicate with you. And if you're in an area like Santa Rosa, which part of the city burned, but part of it is still there, chances are you may be able to find people. If you're in a rural area where the entire town burned, where is everybody? It's also difficult because there may not be any broadband communication infrastructure left. It may be completely destroyed. So not only in some of these rural areas is there no place for people to temporarily live, and sometimes it ends up being an RV. Sadly, sometimes it's almost like a tent. Or it may be a whole other state where they moved to live with a relative. And think about that, of their not only their home is gone, but probably where they worked and their source of income is gone as well. And then their
childcare.
Yeah.
Coffee Park was a hotbed of childcare homes. So
yeah,
you just made me think of that.
There were at least a dozen in-home childcare centers that burned that night. In fact, one of my friends had one. Yeah, so all of those things that you might take for granted, oh yeah, no, it's gone. And in fact, even up in Greenville in Plumas County, where they had a devastating fire a year ago, the Dixie fire, they had to drive so far to pick up any mail, to access broadband. Their elementary school became a place that was definitely a hub so that they could get online. So the challenges become much difficult and much more cumbersome, and just time that it takes you to send a message because you don't have Wi-Fi. So you have to go far away. This is all in addition to you trying to live your normal life. If that doesn't stop, you have to somehow still earn a living, still raise children. Children still need to go to school somewhere. So it's a lot. And I think, people say to me sometimes, are you sure you want to work with fire survivors? Isn't that triggering that you're working with fire survivors? I said, you know what? For me, just the reaction I get sometimes is one of feeling exhaustion, because it is just so much work. Mm-hmm. It is so much work. That's the empathy feeling I get when I encounter people about to start this road to recovery, is just, I feel empathy for how exhausting it is.
Yeah.
Well, and I just want them to take a break and make sure that they're caring for themselves, because it's a long haul. It's like preparing for a marathon. I know you hear that a lot. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's true. And you just need to conserve some of that energy. Yeah.
Because there's a reason why people burn out, and it is, especially if they've been, I see a lot of burnout. We both have seen that, especially if they've been through a disaster, because those first couple of years in particular, like, you're not only dealing with, in your case, the rebuilding of your home and, and having your children, all of that. And I didn't even lose my home. And I know that it took years for my central nervous system to calm down. Yeah. I think it may have just calmed down like in the past 6 months, quite frankly, but it takes a lot. There's a huge trauma response. And when we walk into a community, like, we know that they're in trauma, and the unimaginable has become their reality. And it's very, it can be incredibly triggering or exhausting to stand in front of them and understand like how far they have to go. So I appreciate the fact that you've not burned out on that because
Well, it's all the more reason to take an approach that is willing to collaborate,
yeah,
whether you're an individual fire survivor or you're the mayor of the town or the county supervisor or whichever role you have. You should not try to go it alone or think that you have all the answers, because nobody has all the answers, frankly.
nobody.
And there isn't one right answer a lot of the time. And so the more you can have this kind of, it's a bit of a vulnerable position, but at the same time, when you have that position of openness and collaborative disposition, it's really remarkable how relieving it is to you, but also opening doors to new ways of problem solving and resource sharing. And frankly, it's just a little bit more fun too, I think.
Yeah. Oh God, I think it's so much more fun. And then there's even those moments like all we can really do is show up, bring the people to the table that we think should be there. And then we have to leave room for the process that's in front of us and the people and how they need us to move through it. And then there are those, and then there are moments that like when you and I were standing at a condominium complex recently, and, we had brought Fannie Mae and a couple of other national organizations, and just to listen to, like, what's going on here. And every single time, I've never worked in a wildfire where I haven't like come out of it like, I've learned so much. But you and I were standing there, and the president of the condo association walked up, and he's got glasses on. He's a guy in his 60s, is my guess, and he wanted to just say thank you, and he did like that talk sob thing where he was just like so grateful. And those are the moments that I live for, because I feel like we've met humanity where it lives, like, oh, like when it works, it feels like poetry. When you see people actually feel like, oh my God, maybe I can do this.
Taking that time to just sit and listen to each other, even in my own experience in my neighborhood, listening to my neighbors and like, oh, what decisions you're making. They're not going to be the same decisions that I'm going to make, because each family has their own situation, their own needs and their own goals. And resources. It's going to be different from each, but taking time to listen and to do it with so much grace is really important, because you're all coming raw. A lot of it's raw, the emotions, the thoughts, and but that's huge. And I think, why is it that sometimes we're at our best selves when we're in the most vulnerable or difficult situations? I think it is true, and sadly, we wouldn't want that to happen to anyone. However, it's a time when people do shine sometimes, and the hope is that let's just try to do this better. Let's build back better. Let's fix the systems that aren't working anymore. And that's really why we like to work at the community level and try to figure out, is there something systematic that can mitigate some of the difficulties, and maybe help people have a more resilient home, help communities be more resilient, help us take care of the land around us so that maybe we won't all burn up again. Because the climate thing is really, really challenging. And from fires to floods to wind to tornado, all those different things, it's not the way it was before in previous generations.
Fannie Mae provides mortgage options for you and your family. If you have a mortgage owned by Fannie Mae, you may have financial options available after a disaster, such as forbearance plans, deferral of payments, lending assistance, and counseling. Find out more from our Disaster Response Network. Go online at www.knowyouroptions.com/relief or call 1-877-833-1746 today.
There's no shortage of need for the type of thing that we've been doing and that we want to continue doing. I think that community-based piece is our most instructive place. And I just have to call it out over and over again that one of our goals is to really shorten that space between the people making all the decisions, the funding decisions, the policy decisions, all of the decisions that actually affect the frontline folks. And if they don't know what's going on at the front line, then those policy or funding decisions will not be as effective and informed as they could be. And it's one of the things that I like about so much about when we go into the community and learn something new, but also connect something across all of the wildfires or mega fires that we have worked in. And we see that that's something that's a constant need, like, you know, being able to more easily access grant money or even know that that's there. You know, it's very challenging.
And to have it show up in a timely way so that you can actually get people under a safe roof and not wait 5 or 6 years before the check arrives.
Well, and wildfires is different, that it is more displacing than wind and rain events. You can have some tornadoes where you do see whole neighborhoods are gone, and we're not like disavowing any of those things, but we're saying that wildfire and the kinds that we have now are uniquely displacing. That's what you were talking about, like people just, you know, they scatter. And so we're always learning about new ways to help them communicate. I know in Paradise, you know, Jenna Murray with the zone captains was sending out postcards to former addresses, knowing that the post office would actually forward them to where they were living now. Or, you know, in Colorado, they're using Slack, you know, which you can only really do in a broadband rich community, but it doesn't, but we kind of like hold on to all of those tools. So what's been,
well, it just speaks to the fact that you have to know who the people that you're trying to reach. And it may be making a phone call. And in Greenville, actually, I know one of their leaders called so many people on the phone when they were able to get the phone number and just talk to them. And I know in Lake County too, I have colleagues up there that would just call people on the phone and check in on them, maybe older individuals or ones who don't use a computer very much. And you know, you just have to, it comes down to human beings, human behavior, human beings, human needs, and some amazing humans who are the leaders who connect those dots.
And I like that you pointed that, because it is meeting the community where they're at. And that's one of the things that we really work at, is we try to figure out where they're at. And then we like reverse engineer in that sense, and to figure out how we can be of the greatest service. And I often get questions from funders like, exactly what will you do in the 2022 fire season, for example? And I'm like, well, it really depends on where it is. And I know these are things that we will do for sure. But if you want to know like exactly how many people we will help, I don't know where that fire is going to burn down. So I cannot tell you that exactly. So it's one of the things. I would love for you to talk about two things. The first one is that when you started like really working in other wildfires, what surprised you the most? And the second thing is to talk about the virtual, the monthly meetings, and that it's what have some of the topics been? Because I know I have a favorite topic.
Sure. What surprised me the most, I think, well, there's a sameness. When you visit right after a fire, there's an odd sameness to what you see, to that raw destruction. And again, that weary feeling. I think I don't know if it's a surprise, but maybe it's a delight in meeting the individual people in the different communities, and how remarkably smart and creative and caring these folks are, and how hard people are working. And I would just say that I hope that a lot of times it comes down to money. And unfortunately, I personally just like get so bored and hate thinking about money, but unfortunately, it's how our society works. And so if some of these people can be compensated for their very hard work so that they know that their services can continue with disaster case management and providing assistance with all kinds of programs, we just would love to know that these because they're needed for a long time. They're not just needed in a short amount of time.
A
And
minimum of 3 years of funding should go into each of
Really?
these communities for
Yeah.
their case management, and it should not be hobbled together. It should be a block grant
Yeah.
that can also afford to pay people not only like what you're willing to pay them, but what they actually need to survive in that
Mhm.
area to remain part of the community. Side
Yeah.
note, very important.
Yeah, and so also what surprised me maybe with my own recovery, and I like to talk about with other communities, is thinking differently about like what am I going to rebuild in replacement of what was here, because I was never setting out to build a house ever. So but now that I have that chance, what can I do to make it safer and make it more you know a responsible use of resources. And I know that water is an issue that is near and dear to my heart, and making sure that because water is not a renewable resource, and we need to have clean water, and we need to have enough water in the atmosphere to make things not so dry. I mean, we're living through a historic drought in California, and how can we retain water in our landscape, on our property and in the region more, so that it won't burn so quickly. So those ideas of thinking about water infrastructure and energy infrastructure, and maybe what the materials are in my home, those are important things to think through. And I don't know that necessarily, unless you were in the building industry, you'd be thinking about those things, but you need to make those decisions very early on, and you might not be ready for them. And so that's what just
They're also, they can be expensive. And that's one of the things that we run into often in a lot of communities is those who, want to employ the best practices for both energy and resiliency for their homes. But that's also a point of privilege where not everybody can afford that. And I'm happy that like the Inflation Reduction Act actually has a lot of more tax credits and the ability to actually build back, safer, greener, more earth friendly. But it's been, a struggle for our communities.
Sure.
And hoping that changes.
Yeah, and I would say for rental, I think another thing to think about is how many people rent homes, and who owns those homes, those apartment buildings, those places where those people want to live in a safe, resilient place too. How can we make sure that our rental housing stock is also built back in a way that is thinking about those things?
Yeah. And Lori Schumann, actually a community enterprise community partners, it's a big initiative that they have, which is about making sure that, affordable housing also has climate resiliency built in. And they're really on the forefront of working with CDFIs and working on that. And I'm so glad you brought up renters. I actually am hoping that renters insurance becomes something that's written into contracts. And I think that it would, a lot of people don't know that their they're not covered by their landlord. And in Coffee Park, I understand that 50% of the people who lived there were renters. And so
40 to 50%. Yeah. And many had no insurance at all. And it's very affordable. And those people are not saddled with the cost of rebuilding a house, but they lost all of their possessions. And in order to just replace your possessions is pretty daunting. And if you do have renter's insurance, it does provide help for that temporary replacement living arrangement. And so it's really, you just tell all your friends who are renters and your children, definitely get a policy. It's worth it.
Even if it's only $5 a month through Lemonade, like get it anyway. So one of the things when you came, I was really happy when you came on for a lot of reasons, but one of them was that a lot of this work I had been doing sort of like as a lone soldier. And when you came on, you had you have great skill set, amazing experience, of course. And you took over these community to community meetings. So where can people find those and what are they?
Oh yeah, so After the Fire has a YouTube channel. That's a really easy place to look. And so if you find us After the Fire USA on YouTube, there's one of our playlists is called the Community to Community playlist. And we have recordings of somewhat monthly meetings that center on hot topics that come out of this listening that we do when we're just attending meetings, visiting in deployments to areas and hearing like, wow, I'm hearing a lot of people with this particular question or this particular challenge. Let's get some folks who really know about this to come online. We'll have a conversation and take questions. And that's really what that's about. And I tell you, it runs the gamut of, like, for example, there's one about how do we have some kind of remembrance gathering 1 year after our fire. What would be appropriate? What have other people done? So we had one about that. It's going to start to rain really hard. What do we need to do to make sure the land is secure or protected, because there's so much potential first of all, toxins that could run off and erosion and those kind of mudslide situations after a fire. So we have experts on that. We have one about, there's a challenge down in Santa Cruz where very rural mountainous areas burned, where there's a lot of challenges with having adequate septic infrastructure for the rebuild, and it's very costly. And one about composting toilets. Like, what if we could have composting toilets instead of regular traditional kind of toilets as our toilets, and what are the issues that we need to look at to use those? So it goes all the way from to erosion, to toilets, to contracts with builders, to all kinds of things. It just depends on what we're hearing out there. We may be doing another one coming up on contract, understanding the parts and the words in a contract before you sign it with a builder. We're working on that issue right now. Yeah.
So, and you're really good about asking our current communities, because after about 3 years, people, they sort of have an engine in their community and they may not need as much. And that may be when we ask them to come back and help newly fire affected communities. But so the piece around contractor fraud, though, has been just so important, and you have highlighted that there. But also, I feel like there are opportunities inside of our community to community website that, some things to help people, some documents to help people along that you've brought to the table.
Yeah, it came out of my experience, and I certainly didn't invent them out of my brain. And again, just like all of our stuff, it's been learning and collaborating, but we've compiled, for example, a really helpful document that questions that you should ask when you interview different builders if you're going to rebuild your house, to make sure that you're really going into this long-term relationship clear-eyed and understanding what you're getting in that formal it's probably the hugest financial commitment that you've ever made. So what am I signing here? Yeah. That's really what I want to make sure people know. We also have how to organize your community, guidelines for that, we call them block captains or zone captains, where it's really having a representation of certain, it could be geographical representation, or it could be a demographical representation, to be basically a conduit for information during the rebuilding process, because not everybody can go to every meeting and not everybody can ask every question. It just streamlines things and helps make sure that vetted information is being shared. And so we have a guideline for that, how to organize your community into block captains for the rebuild.
And if I can, and we suggest them, we call them adaptable systems. And then if people want to change them, like how they need to in order to work for them, we're completely, and then we just kind of learn and watch. That's how zone captains came out of meeting with the block captains and the Paradise folks. They devised that on the way home, and they even improved it in some ways, because then they realized that they had to have more rural, a bigger swath of land for the number of houses, and that they could use CAL FIRE evacuation zones to do that. And so we have yet to not learn, a lot from a community. And we're also I think we're pretty good about saying, well, I mean, we did that thing wrong, and maybe you'll do it right, and we'll learn from you too. So it's important, I think, that you and I share that when we walk in, that we're not like, yeah, we were perfect at this.
No, and let me just say that my hats off to those communities who had to do this with COVID as another layer of disaster.
Yeah.
Not being able to gather inside a building and have a meeting, but had to figure out ways. And maybe you didn't have broadband and you couldn't gather. So those kind of really huge challenges were, very, very difficult. And I suppose since the whole world, I always say the whole world had that challenge. In a way, it helps when more people understand your challenge. And so the whole world was creating different ways. I mean, we all know how to use Zoom now, right? And didn't everybody know before? No, and people are more willing to use it too, which is actually a benefit. So, those are those silver linings, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something you're working on right now that I just want to mention. By the time that this podcast comes out, it will be months in the rearview mirror, and I'm sure that it will be very successful. But I had gathered together 3 wildfire affected communities. Well, really 4 counties, but then plus Paradise and Woolsey Fire in 2019. For a 2-day conference where I cycled people in and out, including the Coffee Park folks. And I asked, the people I was serving, and they were like, this was profound. We started another one. We wanted to do it in 2020, May of 2020. Of course, that did not happen. And one of the great things was that when you came on, like, one of the things that's great about having great staff is they actually give you the bandwidth or the ability to even do something in the way that it should be done, which is what we're doing with the 2022 Wildfire Leadership Summit. You are the team lead on that. And I can say that I've built relationships over 5 years that I think are very helpful in this space, but really the organizing and understanding it intuitively for where it should be and why it should be there. It's all on you, and you've been remarkable. So can you talk about that summit? Because I'm very impressed.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this. This is going to be happening later this month, and it's an in-person event. So we're all getting ready to be back at an in-person gathering. It's going to span 3 days, and it's just 150 people each day. It's big enough, but small enough at the same time where folks can really meet each other, talk to each other. And it's across all different sectors of wildfire and wildfire recovery. And so we're gathering, first day is focused on community, the communities that have been through this, and we are calling that day Recover, because it's really focusing a little bit on, like, what does that mean to recover? How do we recover together? And how does our community have to think about things moving forward? And then the second day is about rebuild. So rebuild is bringing together public funding questions, building, insurance, philanthropy, all these different issues, economic issues around what it means to rebuild. Who are the stakeholders that need to be a voice in the rebuilding and have to understand what the parameters are for that. And then the last day is called Reimagine, where we're really highlighting those folks who are taking that bold step to think differently about how stuff works post-disaster, especially specifically with wildfires, whether it's innovating with new fire-resistant materials for building my house, or there's information systems that help us with emergency management and communications, or whether it's thinking about our systems, like we've mentioned so many times. How can we make this work better to help more people more quickly, more effectively? And so we've brought together over all 3 days, lots of opportunities to listen. We've said listen a lot during this chat we've had, to listen to one another, and probably people they may not have listened to before because they're in their own sector. I should also add that there's more than one opportunity to listen to some folks who are bringing the wisdom of Indigenous practices to caring for land and thinking in a holistic way about how our ecosystems can be healthy, including people, plants, animals, water, and land. And so I think it'll be great. And we're all going to have different viewpoints and different perspectives, but I believe we're going to be doing a lot of learning.
I'm very proud of the fact that it is the only Wildfire Summit conference gathering in the nation that has a 360 view of what it means to experience a wildfire. And these are mega fires. These are not like your grandparents' fires, but like experience the fire, deal with rebuilding the fire, and then think about like you're right, how to do things differently. So it's certainly a challenge to wrangle all of those people, but the hope is this is something that we can do year in, year out, given the appropriate funding. So if you hear this out there, it's always funding. Doing these things, the kind of work we do is not inexpensive. We are, talent is not inexpensive, but also like really doing it right in a way that honors what people have gone through and what they need to keep going, and how we can continue to work together to have a very different world, a very different approach to wildfire in the future, because at least we're not trying to hold back the sea and the sky. We can do a lot about wildfire, and I hope that you feel really proud of your work here at After the Fire, because I know I am very proud of the work that you've done here.
I am, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. I think many people I know here locally who have lived through this and navigated this keep thinking, wow, I feel like I need to share this somewhere. I could just go on with my life and then leave it behind, but there's something that seems very urgent. Actually, when we read the paper and we hear there's another fire, it's like, I would like to be able to help others, and let's build, I consider it building new knowledge together. Knowledge that's not just trivial, it's knowledge that's literally life and death knowledge. Hopefully that we can take into consideration as leaders, and we're trying to build the capacity and knowledge set of leaders to make very informed decisions for their communities.
And it's that soft infrastructure piece though too. Like hard infrastructure is really important. Materials are really important. Sure. All those things are really important. But actually, building around that soft infrastructure so that people have a place to call. I know that there are leaders who call you just to ask you a question or run something by you, because it's easier when you're not like a stakeholder within the community, but instead you are a trusted advisor that's outside of the community, and encouraging that collaboration and untangling all of the complexities of navigating this as a community. And then also because you've been through it, the rebuilding of your home. And so I just really want to hats off to you, Pam. I think,
and I don't know all the answers. I would say that. No, but we point people in the direction of folks who they can find the answers. So
because you know that you could never do this work if you were a person who thought they had all the answers. You couldn't do it well. That's for sure. There's no way. And we know people. There's a really funny story about this young guy who emailed me because I was like, we'll come in. And he was all, oh no, I know everything you know. And I was like, really? Because I don't even know enough, and I've been doing this 5 years straight, but more power to you, buddy. That happens too. So, but I just,
use our librarian skills to find the resources they need.
I'm here to tell you, librarians are ninjas, man. I tell people all the time, like, Pam is a ninja at this work, and all of her librarianism, along with her experience, is like really pivotal and super effective. And I thank you for coming, doing this work. And a lot of people who've been through rebuilding their homes, it's true, they wouldn't want to do this. They might want to share their knowledge, but they may not want to put as much heart and soul into it as you have. And it's just, I thank you so much for, doing this with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, it's been a very strong and good experience. Thank you.
Do you have any closing thoughts or anything that I should have asked you that I didn't ask you, or anything you'd like to add?
I would just say, even if you haven't been through a fire or some other emergency, know your neighbors. It starts on very human one-to-one relationship building, and that is a huge factor in resilience. Whether you're a kid, an adult, live single, married, whatever, know who your neighbors are, maybe the closest 10 houses, go bring them a cup of sugar. I don't know what you're going to bring them. Bring them a beer. Get to know your neighbors and talk to them, and make sure that you each understand maybe how to help one another on that unfortunate day where it might happen to you, and you can keep each other more safe. But it's much worse if you don't know each other first, and you may save a life. So it's going to be worth it. And a block party is fun, so just do it in a joyful way, find joy and hope. And it's through those human relationships that make this whole thing tolerable, actually, to do, because it's about the people involved.
Well, I can't end it. I can't say anything better than that. So we're going to end it right there. And thank you once again, Pamela Van Halsema, for being on the How to Disaster podcast for the second time.
Thank you, Jen.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us on the podcast, How to Disaster. For more information, please visit our website at afterthefireusa.org. And if you liked this video, please hit subscribe.